Hello everybody, Nick McDonald speaking. Welcome to this week's ICE commentary videos, looking here at the Russell 2000 and the US equity markets. Now, this week is a bit of an unusual situation because it would be quite easy to make a case both bullish or bearish when I look across the daily and weekly charts, in particular for these four major US equity markets. So we're going to go and take a look at each of them, and I'll show you both the bullish and the bearish examples, and then we'll tie that together into what is the most likely thing to happen for the week ahead based on what the charts are telling us. Firstly, the monthly charts just are not telling us anything new. They continue to push up. We know the monthly trend is strong. It's the same across all the index markets. It looks bullish. It is due a pullback at some point. The question mark still becomes, though, when do we see the probability of that pullback occurring? And we have to wait to see some signals and the lower time frames that will come from there first. By the time the monthly charts pull back, we'll just see it right back down here somewhere, 1000, maybe even beyond. So we're not going to see the signals from the monthly chart. All the monthly chart continues to tell us right now is that the monthly charts are bullish. So when we come to the daily and weekly charts, we see a different picture in terms of we see a bit more detail. Now, one thing, and you've seen me look for this pattern many times, we look for these pullbacks into the averages, look for the candles to turn bullish again. I've marked a number of the candles where that's happened on this weekly chart in the past, and the pattern has worked quite well for us in the context of this current trend, and it's the kind of thing we're looking for again. One thing to note, though, we do look for a pullback into the moving averages. That is at least with some part of that candle touching this upper moving average, which is a 10 period moving average. So based on that, we're looking for a bit of a deeper pullback in order to get a weekly chart set up. So there, first thing, even though we're extremely bullish here on the weekly chart, I'd like to see that pull back a little bit further, at least into the averages, preferably in around here, this 1050 kind of level. And if we pull back into that kind of zone, we're right back into that buy zone where I'll start to look for weekly setups again. So there is a slight case for a bigger pullback. Just looking at the daily chart, this is bullish. It's right in that moving average zone. However, you'll notice here that the daily chart has been pulling back a little bit beyond the zone, often back into the 50 period moving average as we're pulling back into the 10 and 20 on the weekly chart. So we'll just keep an eye on this one quite closely as well. When we get a nice little short-term trend going, we get these nice little pullbacks into the 10 and 20. We've got one into the 10 and 20 now. It's just a case of whether we can pull back a little bit further. Certainly, though, there is a bullish case here in terms of if we get a bullish candle in this 10 and 20 period buy zone, then we'll be looking for a break of the high of that bullish candle and a break up out of this zone. The thing we need to see, though, first is that small bullish candle, which would need to form in the early part of this week. The second thing we need to see is a break through the high of that candle. One other just little thing that is going on here. When I draw these support and resistance levels in, I'm always just looking for points where there's been multiple tests and rejections of the same level. Well, we just touched this level back here, 1085, and fallen off it and thought nothing really of it. However, now that we've come back up and broken through it and come back approached it from above, and also just had a little bounce off it, that just starts to become it's still quite minor, but a minus area of support and resistance for me, just something to watch. And another rejection of that level followed by a bullish candle would just really add to that bullish scenario I described if we get a bullish candle that is an up day this week and then a break up through that high. Let's have a quick look at the other markets, because I've spoken there a little bit about the intricacies of the daily and weekly charts, but we're seeing quite a different picture on the Dow, the S&P, and the Nasdaq. So starting with the Dow, this is starting to look like quite a bit of resistance here now on the weekly chart. So the big question here is, does the Dow break through resistance? The Dow's been held back. We've tested this level, failed, we've tested again, failed. Certainly found really good support down here at the lows as well, very much in a range, and we're right at the top of that range again now, just testing. And at the moment, we have had a slight rejection of that level. What I'm looking for, therefore, on the Dow to give me some real direction for the week ahead, if the Dow gets up above last week's high, so we can get quite precise here. High of last week, 15,721. If it gets up above last week's high, things will be looking quite bullish. That will pass my bullishness on to the Russell. Equally, if we break down through the low, that's a confirmed rejection of that resistance. The low there is 155.33. So if we break down through there, that'll be a confirmed rejection, and I'll be looking for the Russell to pull back at least that little bit further into that weekly chart buy zone. So that is the situation on the Dow. The Dow is certainly bearish as long as we remain below that upper resistance level, but bullish if we can get above it. Come in and having a look at the S&P and just seeing if this too has a bit of a mixed, potentially bullish and bearish signal, and it does, because the daily chart, notice it hasn't pulled back as far as the Russell. Just had a couple of little down days, and we have that small bullish candle. Remember, the Russell chart didn't have that small bullish candle? Well, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, like Friday's candle here. So if we break up through the high of Friday early this week, then that will be bullish. I'd be looking for a move up on the S&P. If we break up through the high on Friday and we also see the Dow breaking up through that resistance, that will be particularly good, and starting to see the Dow and the S&P looking bullish. That will be have a knock-on effect to the Russell. If, however, we break down through the lower Friday, that will have invalidated that signal. It will be starting to look like the S&P is going to have a bigger pullback, and almost certainly at the same time we'll have seen the Dow break lower as well, and therefore Dow and S&P will be looking bearish and both leaning towards the Russell pulling back that bit further. So notice there's a bullish and a bearish scenario. It depends on what happens here first, and we've looked at the Russell as well as now looking at the Dow and the S&P, and both the Dow and the S&P have bullish and bearish scenarios. So it's a case of what happens next. On the Dow, do we break up through resistance or do we reject it? If we break up through it, I'll be bullish the Russell as well. If we reject it, I'll be bearish the Russell as well. Also on the S&P, if we can break up just through Friday's high, that will be an early indication of bullishness. But if we break down through Friday's low first, that will be an early indication of bearishness. The Nasdaq doesn't add too much more weight to this. And when we look at this, it's just, in fact, quite similar to what we just looked at on the S&P, but we don't have the bullish candle. So we're in that buy zone. We've just consolidated, just had a really quiet week, really. But the weekly chart does look like it's due a bit more of a pullback. We've rallied up, had some quite a big bullish candle, followed by a smaller bullish candle, and quite a small bearish candle now, extended from the averages, and it's just due a bit of a bigger pullback, whereas we didn't see that on the Russell because we've already pulled back and we're closer to the averages. Just coming back, therefore, and looking at the Russell again and tying things together. Notice here, remember that comparison that we just saw versus the Nasdaq. The Russell has pulled back closer to the averages, which means if we do pull back here, I don't think the Russell's necessarily got as far to move. The question is, do we rally now from this minor support level we've formed, and as we're in the in the daily chart buy zone, or do we pull back at least a little bit further first? Until I see the Dow breaking up through resistance, I'd be leaning towards we'll pull back a little bit further first. If, however, the S&P breaks up through Friday's highs, the Dow breaks up through last week's highs, we start to look bullish, then I'd be starting to look for bullish opportunities on this daily chart to set up in the early part of this week. So it's a case of watch and see. I'll take the trades that the market gives me. I'm not going to be fixed this week on bullish or bearish. It could go either direction, but there are some obvious scenarios there in each direction. Hopefully you understand exactly what I was getting at there in terms of what we're looking for, and certainly I'll be just looking to trade the opportunities that the market presents itself, not having a fixed view on bullish or bearish for the week ahead, but saying that I think there will be trading opportunities and they could come in either direction. Therefore, I'll be poised and waiting, ready to take the opportunities that the market gives me. And right now, just for clarification purposes, even if we do start to pull back further and get a little bit more decline on these index markets, right now, as of today, I'm seeing no indication that we're looking for that bigger pullback yet on the monthly chart. Sometime soon, as I've said many times, almost every week, we say there'll be a bigger pullback at some stage. Right now, though, there's no indication of that. I'll wait until the charts tell me that it is underway, as compared to trying to pick tops. Hope that helps everybody. Have a fantastic week's trading, and I'll speak to you on ICE Commentary next week.